Minnesota sports fans, to another edition of our Minnesota Sports Roundup. Plenty to discuss over a busy weekend across Minnesota sports, so let's jump right into it with most of the Bring Me the Sports staff. Jonathan Harrison here, joined by Will Raggett, Tony Liebert, and Joe Nelson for a big roundup of the weekend's actions, and it gets no bigger, Will, than the Vikings 23-17 victory over the 49ers. You did a review or a game recap yesterday on the channel. Go check that out if you haven't already. Also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But a big victory for the Vikings, and I guess the question that I have for all of you guys, and we'll start with Will here. Have your expectations changed for what the Vikings can do this season based off of the first two games that we've seen and how well they've played in those games?
Yeah, I think they have to change. I came into this season. I think I predicted the Vikings would go 9-8, and that was certainly a little more optimistic than Vegas's 6.5 total, which I always felt was a bit low. But I didn't think that this was necessarily a playoff team. I thought there was a lot of things that had to go right for that to happen. Chiefly among them, of course, the Sam Darnold piece. And so far through 2 weeks, the Vikings can't really ask for much more than what they've gotten. I mean, Darnold has, yes, he's thrown an interception in both games, and he actually threw one that was his fault this time on Sunday. And there's just been the occasional risky moment from him, but for the most part, it's been really smooth. He's looked confident, he's looked poised, he's looked accurate. He doesn't look like the version of himself that we saw with the Jets and the Panthers when he was a younger player. He just looks like he's thriving in this opportunity with Kevin O'Connell and Justin Jefferson and the solid offensive line in front of him. Wasn't pressured very much against the 49ers. So, there's a lot we can get into as well with that. I mean, the defensive side of the ball has been so impressive for the Vikings. But I'm suddenly thinking like 9-8 is this Vikings team's floor, because that would mean going 7-8 the rest of the way. And yes, they have some tough games in there, but they also have quite a few games that look pretty favorable after the first couple weeks. I'm starting to think that this team can win 10, 11 games. Again, it's really early, and they have to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it and stay healthy. But my expectations have certainly changed. I think it'd be kind of foolish to bury my head in the sand and not react to the 2 weeks that I've seen so far.
Yep, I'll say this. I'll admit I was way too low on the Vikings. I've been way too low the whole time. I said 12-5, and I think they might do 14-3, 15-2, 16-1. I mean,
I knew that was coming.
We should all feel pretty bad about underselling the high hopes this team has clearly had from the jump. I mean, you beat the Giants, it's one thing. You take down the 49ers, it's another thing. I was thinking last night after they beat the 49ers that, you know what, Sam Darnold was probably playing pretty tight to start that New York game, getting another opportunity in the NFL after 6 years of misery, essentially with the Carolina Panthers and the New York Jets. And here we go. You're number 6 officially, off to a good start. But then you got to imagine he hears all the outside noise that, yeah, you did it against the Giants. Now do it against a contender. And then to do it against the San Francisco 49ers, you have to think that maybe he starts to loosen up and starts to buy in to the old Sam Darnold, the 3rd overall pick in 2018. And if that's the case, we might get some serious quarterback play here developing in the coming weeks. Houston's a great test because they sacked Caleb Williams 7 times on Sunday Night Football. I don't know how many of those are on Caleb Williams for holding on to the ball too long, but I'm going to guess it's probably at least half of them. But it's a big challenge. But I'm looking at the schedule right now. Houston at home. I know the Texans are favored, but we saw what happened when the 49ers were favored at Minneapolis. They left with a big old black eye, and Houston's going to have the same situation, I think, unfold this week. And then Green Bay, if Jordan Love's not 100%, the Vikings have a winnable game, which I thought they would lose. And then the Jets in London looks like a very winnable game as well. So you could be 5-0 going into the bye week, and all of a sudden, God forbid any serious injuries, you get TJ Hawkinson back, and it's cruise control from there, because that's when you hit that easy part of the schedule after the Lions game in week 7. So yeah, undersold at 12 wins.
Tony, did you undersell the Vikings? Because I know you were the biggest dissenter of the group when we picked the schedule a couple weeks ago. You said 7-10. That's looking like a pretty big understatement at this, or a pretty big undersell at this point.
Yeah. I would say my expectations have changed drastically. I think a lot of the NFL is doubting Sam Darnold and doubted him to start the year. And I think the biggest question is how much is that going to change? Because as we've seen every year in the NFL, teams change their scheme and they see that Sam Darnold's way better than they thought, and teams are going to defend him differently. And it's going to be important to see how he reacts to that. But I'll admit he's a lot better than I thought he was going to be this year, and I don't think that's any crazy analysis, but I think that's kind of where it comes down to. He's really everything that the Vikings could have hoped him to be. And even like Joe said, I think there's a lot of potential for him to do more. When you get Hawkinson back and you get all of these weapons healthy every week, you get Jordan Addison at 100%. It's an interesting ceiling because as crazy as Joe has sounded, saying that they might go 12-5, uh, you look at the schedule and I think the way they're built, they're not going to really be out of any of these games. I think watching the NFL enough, you know that there's going to be one game here or there that they just don't have it, and the other team has it to an extra level, and kind of all the bounces go their way. But I mean, it's hard to poke holes in these first two games, and I think it's totally fair to have high expectations now.
Raise your hand if you were crapping your pants when Justin Jefferson came out of the game and then Aaron Jones fumbled at the 1 yard line and the Vikings are up 20-7. I know, Jonathan, you messaged me on our Slack chat and you're like, we're going to lose 21-20, aren't we?
No, I said 20. I said my prediction of 27-20 49ers is still on the table at that point.
Somebody messaged me that. All I know is that there was a lot of brown stuff running down Vikings fans' legs when that happened yesterday on Sunday. And I don't know if you noticed, but Sam Darnold kind of stuck the knife into the 49ers and turned it, and then started pounding nails in the coffin with 2 third-down completions to Brandon Powell, and then that 26-yard back shoulder in the middle of the field throw to Jalen Naylor. That was a thing of beauty. I mean,
I thought that was a for sure interception when I saw that ball going out of his hand. I'm like, what is this throw? And it just, like, you look at the replay from the end zone camera, and you're like, oh, that throw makes sense because there's this giant window right there for him to throw into. But from the angle that you see on the TV, it just didn't make sense that that throw was happening.
I mean, that was the most impressive sequence of the whole game. And the 97-yard touchdown was one of the most electrifying moments of the last decade for the Vikings. I mean, that was unbelievable. But it was that drive with no Jefferson. You're already down Addison and Hawkinson. You're trotting out there with Tristan Jackson, who wasn't active last week, with Brandon Powell, with Jalen Naylor as your number one, Trent Sherfield. And to deliver the way that they did, 3 third downs in a row, that throw that he put where only Naylor could get it in around 3 defenders. I mean, that to me said more about Sam Darnold in this offense and how he's feeling right now than anything we saw against the Giants and even anything we saw early on against the 49ers. That was a guy who did not get rattled by the moment. He did not start to think, here we go again. If we punt it away here, we're only up 6 and we're going to lose this game. And no, he went out there and he delivered. And I will say it is very fair. I think if anybody out there wants to be skeptical of Sam Darnold after 2 games, because it is still a small sample size of him looking like this. It's a very large sample size in his career of things not going well. But I see signs that it's sustainable because it's this new environment and it's Kevin O'Connell and it's the best situation he's ever been in. And you hear Darnold talk in pressers and you watch his body language during games and he seems to have that confidence in O'Connell's offense and in Justin Jefferson and in Jalen Naylor and all of the pieces around him. So yeah, next week's going to be tough against the Texans pass rush, but I don't know. I'm feeling like Darnold can sustain this. I don't know that he's going to throw 270 yards and 2 touchdowns every week, but all he has to do is take care of the football and just kind of play point guard for the Vikings, and he's done that so far.
But, real quick, too, guys, that's probably the best defense he'll face all season. I mean, the San Francisco 49ers came in healthy.
Texans
Right?
will be a tough test as well.
Nick Bosa is a monster. Leonard Floyd's a monster. Javon Hargrave's a monster. Fred Warner is a freaking Hall of Famer. I know that Robert Saleh, the Jets head coach, in week number 1, he came away from that game saying it's like Fred Warner is basically like having 3 Pro Bowlers on the field at the same time. And we saw that. 2 red zone turnovers forced by him. The guy's an absolute freak. But Minnesota and Darnold, shorthanded as they were, getting the job done against that unit, I mean, it's not going to get much tougher unless you were playing on the road. I mean, it's remarkable that you can make the argument, and I know, Will, you pointed this out in your game recap and your video yesterday on Sunday, that very well could have been a blowout. The Vikings could have blown them out of US Bank Stadium if it weren't for that muffed punt slipping out of the fingertips of Jay Ward and Brian Asamoah II, and then Jones fumbling at the goal line, and Darnold throwing a really bad pick. I mean, the good news about that Darnold pick is that he wasn't under like immense pressure. It just was a bad decision. Like, I think a lot of his problems in the past were him trying to make plays when basically you had a blanket over your face and couldn't see anything, and it resulted in interceptions. So there's absolutely no reason to come away from this game thinking anything other than the Vikings are more contender than Cupcake.
I know
Yeah,
it's
the Texans are going to be tough next week defensively as well. But you're right. I mean, they were about a foot away from being up 27-7 in that game. The muff punt, I realized didn't actually matter as much because Josh Metellus got the interception like 3 plays later. But yeah, had Jones scored that touchdown, they win that game by 2 scores and fairly comfortably. And maybe the conversation's even a little bit different today. So go ahead, Tony.
I mean, like Joe mentioned, like this is probably the best defense they're going to face all year. The Texans have a lot of weapons on defense too, but I mean, if you look at their schedule, like there's not like this was kind of the game that was going to tell a lot about the Vikings. And if you look ahead, there's not many other games that you're like, oh, that's a for sure loss. So that's what I think is interesting. Like, Joe, where do you think the next or loss at all on the Vikings schedule is going to come?
Honest to God, if Jordan Love plays in week number 4, that's going to be really tough. I mean, I think you take the Colts as a really good example against essentially a quarterbackless Packers team. Playing at Lambeau Field is very difficult no matter when you do it or what their team looks like. I think they have a strong defense, and that should tell you something about how good the Eagles looked in the opener in Monday night. Although I think the field turf in Brazil might have made things a little bit more challenging for Green Bay and everybody on defense that night. But you could beat Houston, you can beat Green Bay if Jordan Love is or isn't healthy, but especially if he's not healthy and perhaps doesn't even play. Remember, we had all this crap with Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Love all week, and then the NFL insiders kept on saying McCaffrey's a long shot to play, and Jordan Love, he's not going to play. So no matter what the player or the coach says, Will, I think you're right. We can trust some of these big-name reporters. So when we get a report on Sunday morning from Ian Rappaport saying that Jordan Love's targeting week number 5, that's a game against the Rams, and that would mean that he would miss the Vikings game. That's huge. So the game after the bye week is against Detroit. I think Detroit's going to be really tough no matter what. And I can't see the Lions should be 2-0. They're 3 of 12 in the red zone this year. They're moving the football on everybody. They're running the ball at will. Their defense is ferocious. They're better than 1-1 says they are after a couple of tough games. But I'm looking at the schedule and let's see, the Rams, they don't have any wide receivers left. The Colts don't look good. Jaguars, Titans, the Bears are terrible. They just keep false starting. Arizona is here in December. Atlanta, oh my God, that's here. Chicago's here. I think you got to go to December 22nd against Seattle when the Vikings are 14-0 to find that first loss.
I would be stunned if the Vikings make it to the bye week at 5-0, or at least I'll say I would be stunned if they make it out of that Lions game in week 7 at 6-0. Just because the Texans this week, you're going to have to play really well again to win that game against I think you can make the argument that that's a tougher game than the McCaffrey-less 49ers, just because I think C.J. Stroud is tiers above Brock Purdy as a quarterback. Nico Collins is better than Debo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk, and that pass rush that the Texans have, it's not just Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson. They have Derek Barnett and Mario Edwards and a few other guys who are getting after Caleb Williams, and then Derek Stingley and that rookie Lassiter who had a pick of William. Like they look really good. Then it's the Jordan Love thing really could swing how we feel about that Packers game, but the Jets in London, that's not going to be an easy game by any means. Maybe Rodgers will be rolling a little bit more by that point, and then the Lions will be tough. So I really think like this Vikings team has changed my expectations. They look good. I would probably, if I had to predict right now, I might say 11 wins, and that would have sounded crazy to even me 2 weeks ago.
By Christmas, right? 11 wins by Christmas.
I would say 11 wins on the season still feels not too crazy right now, and I think that's still even optimistic to some people, like Dan Graziano from ESPN, who doesn't think they're gonna make the playoffs at all. But it's just you got to keep doing it, and you got to just go out there, and this is what the Vikings have said their focus on. It's just go 1-0 each week, and go try to beat the Texans again next week and prove it to more people. And the Vikings know what they believe they have. They've believed all along that they can be a really good team, and they get another chance to show that next week.
I would venture to guess that by now in this conversation, we all agree that after what we've seen from the first 2 weeks, the Vikings probably playoff contenders at this point, if not firmly in that conversation. Is this, from what we've seen from Sam Darnold in the first 2 weeks, is this a quarterback who's playing well enough that you think he can lead the Vikings on a playoff run?
I mean, we are a long ways away from that. I would say
it's very early. I understand that.
I would say let's that'll be a good conversation to have if this team's sitting at 9-5 somewhere in early December. But as of right now, I mean, maybe, sure. Like let's see some more from Darnold. But the fact that he went out and he threw for 270 and 2 tutties against the 49ers without Jordan Addison and without TJ Hawkinson, like that's legitimately impressive stuff. And so obviously health comes and goes, and we already had the scare with, Addison sounds like he might miss another week or two. Jefferson had a little scare, but if they can get all 3 of those guys in the lineup for most of the stretch run here, I just, the tools, the pieces are going to be there for Addison for Darnold to put together some more performances like this.
Yeah. It's all going to. Sorry, Tony. It's all going to come down to protection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sam Darnold. The narrative has always been if he's under duress, he struggles. I think the 49ers pressured him. What was it? 9 times that Pro Football tracked him.
9 of 31 dropbacks, which is not much at all. Yeah,
that's incredible. So if he's protected at that level this season, I don't care if it's a regular season game or a playoff game, a home game or a road game. If you protect a guy with that kind of arm talent, with these kinds of weapons, sky's the limit.
Yeah, I think before the bye week, I think like the first 2 weeks showed the floor of this team, kind of how Will mentioned that like 9 wins might be the floor. And I think the next 4 weeks are going to kind of show the ceiling. Because Darnold's shown that he can do it, and the 49ers are one of the best defenses in the NFL, and doing it against them, you deserve a ton of credit for that. But doing it in multiple weeks and now against the Texans, the Packers, the Jets, if he can do that 3 weeks in a row, 4 weeks in a row, I think we can kind of see if the ceiling's there for a deep playoff run.
Here's one thing I would say too is like Vikings fans listening to this, there's some of the jaded types might be rolling their eyes and thinking, how can you guys be this confident? Like they could totally fall apart. I've seen this before. You'll remember, I mean, this is the first time they've been 2-0 since 2016 when they were 5-0 and then finished 8-8 and missed the playoffs. So like, I understand that, but even more than the Darnold discussion, the reason that I'm confident this Vikings team is not going to have substantial regression at any point this season is because Brian Flores is a top 3 defensive coach in the league, and this roster on defense is so good. Like the depth, the veterans, the experience, the versatility, they are going to be in just about every game, if not quite literally every single game this season, because the defense is that good, because you have Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard and Blake Cashman and all of the holdovers who were so good last year, the safeties and Ivan Pace, and you have Stephon Gilmore in there. It's just, it is a really, really good defense. I know Jordan Mason and Brock Purdy move the ball to over 400 yards of total offense, but they make plays, they force takeaways, they can stiffen up on third and fourth down in the red zone. It's just, the defense is the floor raiser to me. What'll be the ceiling determiner is Sam Darnold in the offense.
Yep, that's exactly right, and this is honest to God. It's a really simple three reasons that went into my faith in this team actually being quite good this year, as long as they had requisite play from Sam Darnold. One, you have elite offensive coaching, where even with Nick Mullins and Josh Dobbs and Jaron Hall, for half of the season, you produced 7 victories. That's a freaking miracle that they did that last year, especially without Justin Jefferson for effectively 9-10 games, right? And then defensively, year 2, half this defense is back. A lot of the depth guys are back. I think you have 6 or 7 new starters who have come in. But year 2 under Brian Flores is a scary thing, because, as Brock Purdy said, scheme is crazy, right? That's what he said after the game. And then the talent is just better. You're younger and faster, and that makes Flores' scheme that much more sinister. So add in the fact that you have an actual running game this year. You have great offensive coaching, great defensive coaching, and a running game. You won 7 games with playing with like used toys last year. Now you got all the fresh new stuff, right? You're gonna be good. So 12 wins, 13 wins, 14 wins, anything's on the table at this point.
Is this from we've been having the discussion about the defense at this point? Is this a top 10 unit? Can this be a top 10 unit or even higher?
Oh, I think their floor is, I mean, they were 11th in defensive DVOA last year. If they finish lower than that, I'd be genuinely surprised, because it's year 2 of the scheme. It's a better roster. Like,
It's
Danielle
deeper
Hunter is
for sure.
awesome. I mean, you saw Danielle Hunter just demolish Caleb Williams on that sack late in the game last night. But this roster is better. It's deeper. There's more experience. Like, the thing that wows me is you've got guys like Jihad Ward, who's played in a bunch of NFL games as like one of your rotational guys on the defensive line. I mean, you got Bobby McCain's a longtime veteran. He's on the practice squad. Kamu Grugier-Hill is a longtime NFL linebacker. He's playing on special team. Like, there is some depth and experience here. So even if they have an injury to somebody, like, I don't know that there's one player on this team who, if they miss a month, the defense will totally sink. Obviously, there's guys like Van Ginkel and Grenard and Josh Metellus and Pace, who you really wouldn't want to lose. Blake Cashman is in that as well. But if it's one guy and it's not a season-ending thing, I think they'll be able to survive it. So I think this is going to be a top 6 defense in the NFL this year.
Yeah, I mean, I would completely agree with that. I think defensively, through 2 weeks, you're figuring out how good of an offseason they had, adding guys like Van Ginkel and Cashman. And, like, I agree with everything Will said. They just have better players on defense. And Hunter was a big loss, but I think they quickly proved that they just have the dudes to be one of the better units in the NFL.
Yeah.
Second in DVOA right now, defensively through 2 weeks. Fourth, I believe, overall in DVOA. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty good start through 2 weeks.
I think, the eye test is there too, right? Like what you do to a quarterback. How comfortable does an opposing quarterback look when they play against the defense? Obviously, Daniel Jones looked like he was in hell in a cell against 15 other guys. It was brutal. And then Brock Purdy did not look good. I mean, he had some nice throws and he made some nice plays, but the Vikings didn't bring a ton of blitzes. They pressured him. They sacked him 6 times. They made him uncomfortable to the point that he didn't look that good. He made a lot of bad throws too that were nearly picked off. So, I don't know how many turnover worthy plays Pro Football Focus tracked him for, but I bet it's 2 or 3. It's got to be 2 or 3. which is a high number for that guy who's usually very good at protecting the football and keeping San Francisco's offense on the field. So, I mean,
There were
if you
three of them, according to Pro Football
okay,
Focus.
thank you. Yeah, perfect. So CJ Stroud, one of the better processors in the game, one of the better live arms in the game. He can move. He's got the receivers. This is going to be the ultimate test. If you can make CJ Stroud look a little bit uncomfortable out there, I think then you really get a telltale sign what this defense is doing to the best of the best in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. The Vikings weren't the only team that had an impressive win this weekend. The Gophers as well, 27-0 shutout of Nevada this weekend. Tony, you did the game recap for us right here on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. Also go check that out if you haven't. It was a big day for Darius Taylor, 11 carries, 124 yards rushing, 11.3 yards per rush. It's just insane. Just a monster day for Darius Taylor. What is that the biggest takeaway? Is Darius Taylor's return and continued excellence at that running back position for the Gophers, Tony?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important to not take away a whole lot against Rhode Island and Nevada. It's a lot different than the Big Ten teams they're going to face the next 3 weeks. My biggest takeaway the last 2 weeks is that the Gophers are just a much different team when Darius Taylor is in the lineup. I think they probably would have won that week 1 game against North Carolina if he was fully healthy. They're just way more dynamic offensively. I've been really impressed with how they've gotten the running backs involved in the passing game. That's something that the Gophers have really never done under PJ Fleck, and I think it adds a much needed wrinkle to that offense. And then defensively, I think first year defensive coordinator Corey Heatherman has shown that they're going to have one of the better units really in the country, maybe a top 25 defense. And there's just a ton of playmakers all over the field. Redshirt freshman Kerry Brown, he was just named Big Ten Freshman of the Week. He had 2 interceptions. The defensive line is loaded, and it sets up a pretty big game this week against Iowa.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing this game against Iowa this weekend because the Gophers failed their only real test so far, and they a very narrow season opening loss to North Carolina, and then the way the schedule worked out, they kind of just cruised the last 2 weeks against teams that just weren't in their weight class, which you can look at either way. You could say that that's not ideal, that they haven't really been tested at all heading into this big rivalry game. You could also say it was kind of nice that Brosmer and the offense could find a little bit of a rhythm after the North Carolina game and now go into their second real test of the season just feeling better about themselves and knowing themselves a little more than they did in the opener. So, yeah, it'll be really interesting. I think the Darius Taylor thing is huge if they can get him going against Iowa. I mean, the Hawkeyes were it was pretty tight against, I believe, Troy through 3 quarters this past weekend before they pulled away. So they look a little beatable. It should be probably a low scoring kind of defense heavy game
In the Big Ten?
under
No,
the lights in
never.
Minneapolis.
I think this is going to be a pretty convincing victory for the Gophers, actually. I was watching a lot of that Iowa-Troy game. And remember, Troy is the same team that lost to Nevada in its season opener. And then you saw what Nevada did. They're awful. And here's a fun fact. Troy was starting the game with their backup quarterback, and that guy got hurt midway through the 3rd quarter. And they had their 3rd-string quarterback in the game for the final approximately 20 minutes of action. So the fact that Iowa wasn't able to pull away until very late, and by the way, 3rd-string quarterback guy threw a pick 6. That really helped Iowa. Iowa separated in that one. Or no, that was, I think, the backup quarterback guy threw a pick 6 and got hurt on the same play. Either way, the fact that Iowa was not trouncing Troy at home is a bit concerning if you're a Hawkeyes fan. So if you think you're going to come into Minneapolis and win against a Gophers team that's allowed 1 touchdown through 3 games, you got another thing coming, big dog. I mean, I just can't see this happening, And the fact that they're favored to come into Huntington Bank Stadium and win is really shocking, and it should be bulletin board material for the Gophers this week.
I guess I'll kind of go against Joe there. I'd be pretty surprised if this game's more than a 1-score game. The Gophers had a lot of tackling issues week 1 against North Carolina. kind of carried over into the Rhode Island game a little bit. They shorted up a little bit against Nevada, but whenever you play Iowa, especially in this matchup with the Gophers, it really just comes down to like 2 or 3 plays. If it's like a blocked punt or an interception. 2 years ago, the Gophers were on the wrong end of those plays. Maybe a fourth down decision if they should kick a field goal or go for it. And it just me personally, I'm skeptical leaning on PJ Fleck in these games because he just routinely has made baffling decisions when it comes to fourth down decisions and just on field coaching. And he proved it last year, I guess, to a certain extent in the Iowa game. But I think that's what it's going to come down to. And I personally would always lean towards the one of the most veteran head coaches in college football with Kirk Ferentz, who's proved it really time in and time out that he can win these games.
I think Cade McNamara throws 3 interceptions in this game. He hasn't faced a defensive line like Minnesota yet. Iowa State's ranked 20th in the country. Their D-line is not as good as Minnesota's. And I say that without knowing a damn thing about Iowa State. I'm just that confident in Minnesota's defensive line because that's a strong point. And you want to know what the result is of that? The Gophers have 7 interceptions. I believe that's number 2 in the nation through 3 games. They're all over the place. It's a ball hawking defense. It's a level up, but again, this is still the Iowa Hawkeyes passing game we're talking about, and they look like garbage on Saturday against Troy. They might have had a nice one against whatever blank state they played in their opener, but against Iowa State, that passing game evaporated, and they didn't look that good against Troy either. So, I don't think there's much reason to worry here this Saturday. In fact, I'm fairly confident the Gophers are going to win by 10.
I'm with Tony a little more on this one. Full disclosure, watched maybe none of the Gophers' last 2 games against Rhode Island and Nevada.
Didn't miss much.
But I watched the opener against North Carolina, and more importantly, I've watched Big Ten football for a long time. My Northwestern Wildcats have gone up against the Iowas and Minnesotas and the Big Ten West specifically. I don't know if that's even still a thing this year, but
it is not.
RIP the Big Ten West. I think the Gophers defense, from what I've seen and what I've heard about them, they should be able to do pretty well against Iowa, but I want to see it from Brosmer specifically because I didn't watch the last 2 games. I watched North Carolina, and I did not see a Big Ten quarterback in that game. He did not look good to me at all. I believe that he's capable of more than that, and that was the opener, and I'll give him, you can shake that one off, but I want to see it this week. I mean, Iowa has never had a bad defense as long as I've been following college football. So to me, this feels like a potential rock fight, and I would be surprised if the Gophers win comfortably, just because it's a rivalry game. It's the Big Ten, 2 defenses that are going to be hungry. I don't know. I don't know that either team scores 20 points. We'll see.
I think it's 24-10 Gophers.
Okay.
Yeah, real quick before you move on, I just think this game is going to come down to stopping the run. The Gophers struggled against O'Marion Hampton in the first game. With North Carolina, one of the best running backs in the country. Iowa's running back has the most rushing yards in the country. And if the Gophers can have the same success they had last year, I think Iowa had less than 30 rushing yards in this game last year. If they can do that, I think they'd be able to win. But I don't know if they'll be able to. It'll come down to tackling, like it.
So can we simplify this? Let's use some logic here, because last year Iowa won, I think, 10 games. They went to the Big Ten championship. They were better last year than they are this year. Is that true?
I think you could make the argument that they're probably just as good. I think their offense is a lot.
Cooper DeJean's gone, and they've lost some pieces.
Caleb Johnson is one of the better running backs in the country. Last year is probably like the 40th best running back.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Caleb Johnson's very good. But are the Gophers better this year than they were last year?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. The Gophers went into Iowa last year.
They shouldn't have won.
They beat the Hawkeyes.
They got a little help.
Who are worse this year than they were last year. And now you're going to take that worse Hawkeyes team, bring them to Minneapolis against a better Gophers team. I mean, I don't see any
Any given
problem.
Saturday.
Yeah, the Gophers were the Gophers worse than Bowling Green when they played them a couple years ago?
It was a blip. It was a blip on the Fleck radar, as we all know.
What? Well, we do know, Joe, you weren't after the first game. You weren't very happy with PJ Fleck's offense against North Carolina. From what you've seen, and I know we're not going to take too much out of the Rhode Island and Nevada games because of the level of opponent, but are you more comfortable? Because you're clearly very comfortable with the Gophers' defense. Are you more comfortable with what you've seen from the Gophers' offense over the last 2 weeks going into this game?
It's a little disappointing, but the where I find some comfort is the willingness to throw the ball, right? If you're going to throw the ball 25, 30 times a game like they have the last couple of weeks, I believe that gives you a much better chance to develop some kind of rhythm. I just felt like they were so ineffective in week number 1 against North Carolina. They were on the field for like 1 minute of the third quarter and just had no chance. If you take any kind of offensive rhythm they had in weeks 2 and 3 and put that into week 1 against North Carolina, and then as Tony's mentioned, add in Darius Taylor's availability, they do beat North Carolina. And North Carolina is a 3-0 team with one of the better ground games in the country. So the Gophers very well should be 3-0. Remember, they had a game-winning kick that sailed just wide right from an All-American caliber kicker who just drills 50-yarders left and right every single week in Dragan Kesic. So I do feel better about the offense. Elijah Spencer has caught the ball the last few weeks. Christian Driver has showed up. Jamison Gears looks like a serviceable tight end. And Daniel Jackson still one of the better receivers in the Big Ten. So, yeah, I mean, I certainly do feel a little bit better about where the Gophers offense is compared to where it was in week number 1. And the style of play has been more appealing to watch and less of a vomit fest.
Let's see if they can do it against a real team.
I think we'll get that opportunity in 2-3 weeks against USC. But I don't know if we'll have that opportunity against Iowa or Michigan.
Yeah, and at the road in the big house, they might as well just give them the win now on that one.
Well, Michigan's made a quarterback change. They're going with Alex Orji. They do not have – is that how you say his name? I don't know.
Yeah.
Inconvenient if it is. But they don't have a passing game. They ran the ball like 60 times. They don't have a passing game. None.
The Gophers need to stop the run first before you start chalking up wins. But
right. Well, Omarion Hampton was good, but it still took him 30 carries to average just over 4 yards a tote in that week 1 game. Let's not forget, Minnesota's defense held a pretty good offense to 19 points or whatever it was in week number 1. They looked good against the Tar Heels outside of some missed tackling issues. The tackling issue has been cleaned up against inferior competition, and now we're going to get a real test against a good running game. But Iowa's not good, guys. They're just not good.
You know who else isn't good at this point? The Twins. Losing six of their last 10.
Oh, what a segue.
You like that? Professional segue here. Losing 6 of their last 10. They now trail the Royals by 2.5 games for second place in the AL Central. They're a ways off of Cleveland. I don't think they're going to catch them with, just about 13 games left in the season and who they've got to play. The Tigers are surging, though. 7 wins in their last 10. Are we in danger of seeing the Twins completely just have the bottom drop out and fall out of the playoff race here, Joe?
Yes, 100%. I mean, you could sweep the Guardians in Cleveland Monday through Thursday, and you're still 2.5 back, and you'd only have 9 games to go. So you're literally on life support in the AL Central, and you have to sweep if you want a chance there. Otherwise, you're done. The analytics, Fangraph says it's like an 83% chance for the Twins to clinch a wild card spot. Baseball Reference has it lower at about 73% for a wild card spot. It's tricky. I don't know if you guys know this, but the Detroit Tigers have the best record in baseball, 22-10 since August 11th. They're roaring, pun intended, and it's a bit scary because they have good starting pitching and some good young bats. The question is, can they get through this week on the road against Kansas City, who they're 3-7 against, and then they have to go back to Baltimore, who they just took 2 of 3 from in Detroit. And then also right on Minnesota's booty is the Seattle Mariners, who have won 8 of their last 11. Fortunately for the Twins, it looks good on paper because the Mariners have to host the Yankees, who are arguably the best team in baseball. So you got to win some games. The Twins are in serious trouble. They're free falling. I think their chance to make the playoffs, according to Baseball Reference, has dropped like 18% in the last 30 days. They're going in the wrong direction. The series against the Reds was a disaster. Um, yeah, I don't know. I would not be optimistic about any kind of deep postseason run unless they really, really show something over the final 13 games.
I would say they're kind of still. It's getting a little dicier. That's for sure. But they're still realistically in the position that they've been in for a while now, which is they're not winning the AL Central. That's pretty clear. They're not going to go sweep Cleveland in 4 games at Progressive Field this week. And even if they did, they probably wouldn't win the division.
Right.
But they're gonna make the playoffs unless they really face plant. Like if they can go 6-7 in the last 13 games, which you'd like to think with Pablo Lopez and Bailey Ober, and ideally a few games of Luis Correa, Buxton all in the lineup together. You like to think they can go 6-7, especially given that they have 3 against the Marlins later this to kind of wrap up this season. Then it would take like a 10-2 or 10-3 stretch from Detroit or Seattle, who neither of whom have the tiebreaker against the Twins, which is so huge. Like
that is huge.
If this was the old format and the tiebreaker wasn't a thing, and like Detroit or Seattle were literally 2.5 games from forcing a game 163, I'd be even a little more concerned. As it is, I thought the Red Sox were going to be the threat because they're the one who still has a chance to win the tiebreaker against the Twins when they play at Fenway Park next weekend, or this upcoming weekend. But then they lost 3 or 4 to the Yankees, so they're a little further back now. I just think as bad as the Twins have been all year, as bad as they've been recently, and as frustrating as they've been at times all year, they're gonna win the 5 or 6 games that they have to the rest of the way to sneak in. And then will they do anything there is obviously the question. I'm skeptical of that. But I don't think they're going to miss the playoffs outright.
You know what's scary? I mean, the Twins could lose Monday night and the Tigers could win, and all of a sudden they're 1.5 back. Let's fast forward 10 days from now. The final series of the season. The Twins have to play the Orioles. Mm-hmm. The Tigers have the White Sox.
Yeah.
They do have the White Sox.
White Sox
might be trying to get their like 36th win or something still.
They might get there. I don't know. I think they've won 2 in a row. They're smoking hot down there on the south side. But that's scary, man. If you come down and it's still in play over that final weekend and you're going up against the Orioles, who might be competing for the top wild card or even the AL East still, they're gunning for you, and they're not going to be easy to beat. I think the Twins got swept when they played them earlier this season, so that's got sweep mentality written all over it on both sides. And if you're sitting there and only up by 2 games, oh man. And this would be an epic collapse for the Twins if they missed the postseason. An epic collapse, and they would have nobody to point their fingers at other than themselves, because they've dug their own grave with all of their decisions they've made. Carlos Correa and his chronic injury history and chronic injury forecasts that were offered by the meteorologists with the New York Mets and San Francisco Giants, right? Like nobody said over there, yeah, let's give this guy $300 million like we thought was a good idea. The Twins went in, they said, okay, let's do it. And we don't know, maybe it was a plantar fasciitis thing that those other teams were worried about. Maybe they looked at his feet and were like, yep, this guy's going to have problems for the rest of his career. We don't know.
But I think we gotta let this play out a little more before we criticize the Twins signing Correa. Like that was the kind of thing you got to do as a team like the Twins, who isn't gonna. You're not gonna go out and outspend the Dodgers and Yankees on but you Juan Soto or whatever.
You have the 13th richest ownership in the game, and these are the decisions you're making based on TV payroll. Yeah, I respect treating things like a business, and I know Polad companies, they own like 80 different businesses, and you don't put them all into one silo. They're siloed off, right? So your incomings and outgoings go into your decision making, but other teams don't operate that way. So it's not a fair playing field in baseball if you don't want to play with the big boys. And every decision that they've made has backfired this season. I mean, it was
Mm-hmm.
bad from the jump. Royce Lewis gets hurt on opening day. All of your offseason acquisitions outside of Carlos Santana have been terrible. You do nothing at the trade deadline. I mean, it just has not worked out. And these are decisions that they've made, and they have to live with them.
I I am in agreement for sure on all of the decisions that they've made really the last offseason and at the trade deadline haven't worked. I really, as a fan, just abhor the fact that they cut payroll after such a successful season last year and that
Yeah.
they really treat it as such a bottom line thing when they have the money to put a better product on the field. I was just pushing back against. I don't think it's time yet to criticize the Correa signing because he had an unbelievable first half, and you know this injury thing has popped up, and if it continues to really be an issue for years to come, which is possible, then maybe we revisit that. But I think just at the time that was a move they absolutely had to make because of what he can give you when he's on the field, and because of how you have to operate when you're not the Yankees or Dodgers. You have to take swings on guys who have some injury questions like Correa or like Byron Buxton or just you have to give yourself the star upside when you're not going to go out and sign a Juan Soto or some more proven guy.
That's true, but there were other shortstops out there like Xander Bogaerts and Dansby Swanson, and I don't even know how they've done this year.
They haven't been good.
I haven't paid attention, but
Yeah.
you really had to settle. It was a settling situation because Correa popped back on the market after he said, "I'd rather go to these two places," and they said, "Well, we don't want you." So you kind of had him gift wrapped and and given right to you because you were the only team that was willing to give him the kind of deal and stability that he was looking for as one of the best players in the game, right? No question about it. It was exciting, and I think they definitely had to make that signing as well. But you can't ignore the fact that you gave a lot of money to a guy whose injury history you said, we weren't bothered by it. We're not worried about these chronic issues that the other teams suspect, right? So we don't even know if the foot and the plantar fasciitis is what the other teams were thinking about. We may never know. It might have been the ankle situation, which I think it was the Mets doctor, the anonymous doctor, who said, worst ankle I've ever seen. That was a big story a couple of years ago before he signed here. I don't know. I just think you made a lot of decisions that made your team very fragile, and it lacks depth, and that's what we're experiencing right now, late in the season, when the push matters most, and you're in jeopardy of totally collapsing and missing the postseason.
Yeah, they're going to make the playoffs. I'm confident in that, and I feel a lot better about them going into the playoffs having Carlos Correa on their roster than not having Carlos Correa. So
Absolutely.
we'll see. I still don't think there's a great odds that this is going to be a team that goes on some deep run, but it's baseball. You get in and you can be the Diamondbacks or the Rangers from last year, and you can give yourself a chance. And I think the encouraging thing, really big picture, is that the Twins have talent coming up through the farm system. I think the Walker Jenkins and Luke Keeschall and Emmanuel Rodriguez and some of the pitching pipeline, like they have a chance to be a more sustainably good team a few years from now. But get in this year, do what you have to do over these final 13 games to give yourself a chance, and then we'll see what happens. I'm certainly not going to go in with the highest expectations, but who knows?
Yeah, they might win 13 straight games and give us real high expectations. Who knows?
Sounds like Joe used all his optimism on the Vikings and Gophers.
Yeah.
Funny how that works.
Final question for you guys. If they do just utterly collapse and miss the playoffs, how hot are seats getting?
I mean, they should arguably get hot, but I don't know that they will. I struggle with the Rocco debate and just how much to pin on managers in baseball, because a lot of times it's just the players on the field aren't executing, and I've had some issues with Baldelli's decisions here and there, but he's been consistent enough through his tenure. I think he's won AL Manager of the Year twice in 5 years or something like that. I don't think he's getting fired. I don't think they're firing the Falvine regime either. I wish the owners could fire themselves and sell the team to somebody who wants to spend more money. But realistically, I don't know that huge changes would come or heads would roll or anything like that if they do miss the playoffs, which some fans might not be pleased by, and I think that's fair. But that's just kind of how I'm viewing it right now.
It's a historically stable job to have, right? I mean, you get that job, you're pretty much locked in for a decade or more. And let's be fair. Like Will says, I don't agree with all of Baldelli's decisions, like taking Bailey Ober out with 83 pitches and he's mowed down 15 guys in a row. Um, and I recognize the fact that ex-Twins like Trevor Plouffe are criticizing Baldelli and the Twins for how they've addressed Royce Lewis late in the season, trying to make him change positions or even entertaining the idea here and there, taking a guy out of his comfort zone. Criticism there, criticism is fair, but the reason the Twins are 9-17 or whatever it is in their last 26 games is not because of Rocco Baldelli. It's because you've built a team that's extremely fragile. So, you've made some nice moves if you're Derek Falvey, if you're Thad Levine, if you're the front office, and you've given Baldelli these pieces on a chessboard to use over the course of a long, grueling season. And it's not Baldelli's fault that these guys are made of glass sometimes and they're in and out of the lineup and you can't develop any consistency. And you have 3 rookies in your starting rotation. And bullpen guys are always going to be up and down in the majors. I mean, there's very few guys in baseball who are just locked in, lights out guys year after year. For every Emmanuel Clase, there's a Josh Hader, right? Like where they go up and down, when they're on their game, like Joan Duran, they're unbelievable, but they're very susceptible to getting smoked from time to time. And that's what the Twins have. This is the roster that was constructed for Baldelli to manage. Baldelli didn't do this himself, so it's not on him.
Yeah, Tony.
Yeah, I mean, I think with anything in sports, especially kind of with PJ Fleck and the Gophers, like Baldelli's seat's probably pretty cold. And even if they did collapse, I think he'd probably come back as manager next year. But that doesn't mean he doesn't deserve criticism from time to time. And a guy that's probably going to have the job for the next few years, like he can improve and he can learn from his mistakes. And I think as a fan or someone watching the team, I think it's more important to approach it with that point of view and I guess hope that he can improve. I guess that's the optimist in me trying to go against what Joe's saying. But yeah, I mean, I think he'll be the manager for definitely a few more years. So it's interesting, but I still think he does deserve criticism from time to time.
Yeah, good stuff from you guys today. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Plenty to discuss across Minnesota sports as we continue to track how these teams do, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more to discuss right back here on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. Go find all of our work over at Vikings, Timberwolves, Twins, Gophers, Badgers on SI, covering it all across Minnesota sports. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.